Chief Justice Warren Burger once wrote, "The obligation of our profession is to serve as healers of human conflict." Welcome to Lawyers as Healers, a podcast exploring an evolution happening inside the American legal profession. I am your host, Dave Albrechta. I am a coach, a mediator, and a recovering litigator. In this podcast, I'll explore how and why an increasing number of lawyers are moving beyond adversarial thinking to return to the obligation of our profession, which is to serve as healers of human conflict. Welcome back to Lawyers as Healers, and today I'm excited to have my guest, Andy Kull. Andy is an attorney, a mediator, and a facilitator, and a peacemaker, whose work explores how conflict resolution can move beyond adversarial systems and toward deeper human understanding and transformation. And Andy's practice blends mediation, organizational facilitation, nonprofit law, and indigenous-informed peacemaking approaches in a way that challenges many conventional assumptions about law, leadership, and conflict. Welcome, Andy. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I love the way you did that intro. I was like, wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, pieced together from our work together and from your website. So it's your language.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good. And so I think I'd like to start, one of the themes that I've been exploring is it tends to be a good starting point for these conversations is, we all tend to start in these traditional roles and traditional law practices, and would just like to get a sense of your, for lack of a better word, transition from that traditional practice into what you're doing now. And if you could just kind of explain what that shift was like for you, and if there was one moment where you realized you needed to shift, or if it was gradual or a combination of those, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a great question. And for people who are listening, I practiced as a traditional lawyer for about 15 years before I figured out that I needed to stop. And when you ask the question, when did you know? I knew when I was a third-year law student, and I remember asking one of my alternative dispute resolution professors, like, boy, do you think there's any way to make a living, as a lawyer that's not adversarial, maybe in mediation or alternative dispute resolution? And she kind of looked at me and said, well, no. She said, it's really impossible to create a mediation practice right out of the box around here. And I was like, oh man. And so I went into law practice, and I don't know that was necessarily true at the time or whether it's true now, but I knew it. And I think that's true for a lot of us. We know it in our bones and we know it in our body. We know something to be true, but we can sort of talk ourselves out of it. And, of course I had little kids and I needed a job. And so I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go do this work. And I became a business commercial lawyer, and I would tell people that I loved my work, which I did to a certain degree, but and we have a very collegial bar here in Maine, and I did a lot of litigation, and I would litigate business disputes, and I did a fair bit of bankruptcy work, and it was really hard because I felt like my being was bifurcated, I guess. I had my work persona. I had to go, even though we were very collegial, and people you were fighting with, you go out for drinks after or whatever, and meet them for lunch and all those things. But at the same time, the adversarial nature, like the water that we were all swimming in, was just crushing me. And interestingly, what happened in my practice in 2017, I quit the firm. I was a partner of a firm in Portland, Maine, and I quit in 2018. And what precipitated that was a case that went sideways. It was, you know, I think if I had, if I was like a born litigator, which some people are, and you know a few, I know a few. I wasn't. I really didn't like it, but I had a case that went really south, and I won't go into the details, but it was a problem, and I hadn't committed malpractice, but I had problems on my hands, and I remember one day I just sat down and I was like, what would I tell any one of my clients? I'd say to them something like, this really sucks, but you're going to get through it. And someday you're going to look back and say, this is the best thing that ever happened to me because there's an opportunity in it. And if you take that opportunity and you allow it to transform yourself and you allow yourself to change, you're really going to appreciate it. This is a chance. And I'm not trying to tell you it doesn't suck. It sucks. And I remember just kind of shaking my head and being like, oh, dang. I guess I'm going to have to take my own advice. And I was really lucky. I mean, talk about privilege and, what privilege looks like and what it means. And I had the opportunity to just quit. My wife had a really solid, strong income. And she said, why don't you just stop? And I was like, what? Stop? I could stop? And so I actually just quit. I kind of ran away. So that's a whole nother story, but it was a challenge that came up and I stopped. So that was 2018.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, you said there's a couple things that stood out to me. I mean, one is that professor's comment, like, isn't that just a kind of great summary of like what we get in law school is there's one way to do this and here's what it is, you know? Um, but you said that litigation was just crushing you, and I'm just curious if you could just say some more about what your experience was as a litigator and what that was like for you.
I can. Sometimes when I present this to lawyers or I talk about peacemaking, I look at the difference between adversarial process and adversarial ways of thinking and relational process and relational ways of thinking. And for me, it's helpful to notice that distinction. So adversarial thinking involves like, kind of black and white, yes or no, all or nothing type thinking. If you're listening to somebody in an adversarial way, like we're taught in law school, we're listening to issue spot. We're listening to argue back. We're listening to win, We're not actually listening to understand. So from a relational listening standpoint, you have to be able to listen like an active listening, listen to actually understand where somebody's coming from. And it's very difficult to do for people like us who are trained in adversarial process, because it's a little bit challenging. Like, wow, to actually understand them, not to agree or disagree, but to actually understand. And so that distinction, I started to see like I've been in hundreds of mediations as a advocate, right? I've gone in there and I've watched cases settle where the parties didn't ever get to the nub of it. Like whatever the root of the issue was, they didn't get there. And maybe they settled and they got kind of beaten by the mediator or whatever, and they worked it out. And they, mediators say things like, if you're both equally unhappy, then it's a good result, And I said that too, is because I'm catching up as a mediator with cases where I actually am the neutral, whether it's peacemaking or however it's working. But that idea that as soon as you enter this process, so we have an adversarial process that's designed to separate people, and it really stops communication. People aren't talking anymore when they're talking through their lawyers, and of course their lawyers have this very strange role. And it's interesting, we're here to talk about lawyers as healers because a lot of us really are. And what I tell the lawyers is that to be a really good advocate, to be a really good lawyer, you have to understand adversarial ways of thinking, adversarial process, but you also have to understand relational ways of thinking and relational process as well. And so when you're all in one, right, and the whole lawyer thing and the whole adversarial model is all based on this kind of thinking mind, right? We're analysis, we're in this very yes or no, white, black mindset. And, interestingly, those are the kinds of things that we can still do when we're having a stress response.
Yeah.
And if you look at dominant culture traits and things like that, like all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, those kinds of ways of looking at things are things that we can do when we're having a stress response. This is going back into kind of evolutionary biology. If we're facing a saber-toothed tiger, we're not going to sit there and ponder whether or not we're going to run or whether we're going to fight or whether we're going to play dead and hide. Our amygdala, our body's going to take over, and we're going to do one of those. And having black and white thinking in that instance is exactly what we need. We're not into creativity, right?
Yeah.
We're into survival. And so when people enter an adversarial process, whether we're a client or a lawyer, the stress of it puts us into the stress response. And so it's easy actually to operate in those black and white, yes or no, I'm right, you're wrong, we're going to fight. And we do, and we can still do that from a space of having a stress response.
Yeah.
And that's stressful, right? It's really stressful. And it was stressful to me. And it's like, so you come home after day of work and pour yourself a glass of whiskey or whatever and decompress and then go back to it the next day. It's like, we weren't wired to be in a stress response all the time. We actually need to regulate ourselves, and we need to come back to center, and we need to relax, and we need to relate because we're relational creatures. And so, so that whole element of people being able to regulate our nervous systems, come back to center, and then relate to the person on the other side, so that we can access our creative thinking and then solve our problems. Because the people with the problems are the ones that are going to come up with the best solutions if we, as the professionals, can support them to do that. But when we're in that adversarial system, it's like a chute that kind of creates this very narrow subset of solutions. And despite that, lawyers all the time are helping clients come up with creative solutions. So we do overcome that, but we're not taught that. We're taught how to do the fight, have the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the default mode for sure. And like you say, once you're in that adversarial mode of thinking, it does become almost more comfortable to stay there. It's more difficult to back out of it and say, wait a second, let's slow down here and do the more creative problem solving. Even though you're right, it certainly happens. That was a great, I really love that description. That might be a good segue. Your website and some of your materials talk about the art of peacemaking. And so I'd love to hear, and maybe some of this relates to that, what you were just explaining, but I'd love to hear more about why you use the word art and, what is, maybe you can just explain what is the art of peacemaking to you.
It's a great question. And so, as a lawyer, right, our job is to have the answers, and we have to give legal advice, and we have to give the right advice. And if we don't, we're actually on the hook, right, for malpractice. And that's, so the idea is that, a client comes in and you're going to be able to look at the law, look at the cases, look at the situation, analyze it, and, and give the answer. And peacemaking turns that on its head a little bit. And I believe that a peacemaker, and if we're a lawyer, if that's part of our work, is actually encompasses all of it. So we have to have relational and adversarial skills. We have to use our mind to analyze the situation. But then we also have to sit back and kind of settle into a space where we're actually observing, or dare I use the word feeling, what's happening in the room, with the people. And when our clients come to us, and this is why the lawyers as healers is such an interesting discussion to have, they're at, not all of us, there's so many different disciplines in the law, but oftentimes they're in a really difficult space, right? Something has happened and they're scared, they're angry, they're in conflict, or they're facing a serious challenge, going through a divorce, whatever it is. They're at a low point and they need somebody to be in their corner, to back them up and support them. And at the same time, so there's this element of all right, somebody's coming in because they, like when I did bankruptcy practice, somebody would they've got a problem, with the debt or whatever it is, and it's stressing them out. And so, I have to look at the situation and try to help solve it. At the same time, relating to what's going on with that human and what they're feeling. And so, if I take myself out of that narrow band, because I don't do that work anymore. I do still practice law, but I limit my practice to working with businesses and nonprofits, and I don't litigate anymore. I don't do any of that stuff. So it takes the pressure off of me. And the art is being able to balance that adversarial thinking and the ability to look at a situation critically with the openness and curiosity and understanding that I don't actually have their answers. They have a problem. They're going to come up with the answers. I can help them. I can support them. This is particularly applicable in mediation and conflict resolution scenarios where, maybe in the old days, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to fire off a set of interrogatories. I'm going to take depositions. I'm going to do all these things when, actually, what does this client actually want? What do they really want here? And what needs to happen? Is this a relationship that needs to be preserved and carefully tended to, at some level? Are they going to have an ongoing relationship after this? Are they not? And then being aware of people's nervous systems, understanding, and these are actually all trauma-informed tools as well. These art of peacemaking tools are, if we're doing this well, we're actually trauma-informed. So when a client comes in and they're having a stress response or a trauma response or whatever it is, to be able to recognize that and help them to regulate themselves, being really aware of our own, because we take it on too. So being able to notice my own emotional state, my stress, regulate myself so that I can actually be present for my client, and then be present and be curious and not have to feel like I have the answers, and that's to me the beauty of the work that I do now is I'm less often in that space where I have to have the answers. And I get that we as lawyers often, we do, we have to give advice and we have to, be able to analyze and all that. But the art of peacemaking, I think, in particular, when I think of peacemaking, I think of the practice of, where I'm facilitating a process or co-facilitating a process with another person. And there's these people in the room, and it could include the lawyers, right? So let's say we have a couple of litigants, we have some lawyers, we have a few other stakeholders, and everybody's in there, and we're trying to, and I'm helping them, supporting them to talk it out. So the art is, figuring out where to use what the tools that we need. One tool might be, we need to take a break.
Yep.
So knowing when to take a break and say, all right, we don't need to do this right now. We're gonna stop. Or knowing when to even break out the parties into caucuses and be like, all right, we're going to stop and we're going to do some coaching with these people. I mean, what do you want today? Like, what do you really want? Because here's what I'm hearing. I'm curious, and then letting them kind of talk through some of their things. So that's really the art is, and sort of break it into the different tools in our kits that we can use. But really what it comes down to is simply being present. And, we hear that term holding space, right? Holding space for people to do whatever they need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. I love that. Um, I want to come back to being present in conflict because I know that's something that's kind of central to the work you do. But before we get there, this other piece I want to talk about, and it comes up on your website. It came up just so people know. I participated in a circle that you held, a virtual circle of lawyers that were in this similar space, and that this came up in that was called the Peacemaker's Blade, I think, is
Yeah.
what you had named that. And so there's a quote on your website where you say that something about being tough on the issue and gentle on the person. And there's that same feel in the Peacemaker's Blade, this idea of a weapon being held by a peacemaker, and this kind of polarity there. And I'd love to just hear you explain that a little bit more. What does it mean to be tough on an issue, gentle on the person, and how do these things relate to how you handle this stuff as a lawyer and mediator?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dave. It's one of my favorite quotes, I have to credit one of my dear friends and mentors, Honorable Cheryl Fairbanks, who's a master peacemaker, a tribal court judge, and just an amazing human. And asked her one time, so where did you hear this? She said, I don't know where I heard it, but tough on the issue and gentle on the person. Really, it's one of those things that's like easy to say and just takes a lifetime to be able to put into practice well. Um, but it goes to this point that when we're in conflict, so, it's great to be all non-adversarial and relational and et cetera, but, when people are in conflict, it's adversarial. Like these
Yeah.
people want to wring each other's necks. It really is adversarial. You're not going to sit there and say, oh, you two really actually do agree. We're just going to figure out, uncover that. It's like, no, they don't. They are fighting and they're, like they're going to burn this thing down if they don't figure out a creative way forward, and you see that all the time in litigation where it's like, the party will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on litigating or whatever it is. And then at the end, the ones who really made out are the lawyers, right?
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother discussion. But tough on the issue means you really have to be able to look at the issues and let people want to address the issues, whatever it is that's actually happening needs to be called out. And it's ironic because how conflict averse we all are, especially even me, like ask my wife, like how good I am at dealing with conflict at home, and you'll find out, right? It's really, even though as a I'm a professional conflict resolver, you could say, as are you, but it's really hard to face conflict, and people don't want to do it. And I was doing an intake yesterday for a woman. It's a workplace dispute. And I do that. I'll meet with the disputants individually first, and then I'm going to bring them together for a joint session next week. And she said, well, I said these things to this other guy, and she said, it was totally unprofessional, and my comments were kind of snide, and I just shouldn't have done it that way. And I was like, did you ever say that to him? No. No, I didn't, And it's like, wow. And so people like, she knew how it would come across. And it's like, we're smart. People are smart. And it's refreshing actually to go right to the issue, but not in a way, but that's again, the art. It's skillful. How do you go right to an issue so that people can actually look at it and address it? While still being gentle on the person, right? And so we have these stories about the other person, like, that guy's a jerk. And, that guy may very well be acting like a jerk. But why? What's going on here? And sort of as the professional, either the lawyer or the peacemaker or mediator or whoever you are in that situation, being able to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. I think it's like Brene Brown said something like, attributing best intention to, I'm murdering that statement, but, like there's leadership training on, giving people the benefit of the doubt that they assuming good intention, even when somebody's acting like a complete nutcase, like there's a reason they're
Yeah.
acting like that,
Yeah.
And so like to actually understand that, this person at some level is just like me. They actually want to be happy. They don't want to be miserable. And you can sit there and see like, wow, this person's creating like misery for themselves and everybody else. But at some place in their confused mind, they think they're they think it is moving toward what they want. So it's like, and that goes back to the stress response thing, which is when we're entrenched in our space and we're having this stress response, and all we can do is fight or freeze or run, whatever,
Yeah.
or maybe all three, alternately or at the same time. We can't actually act in our own best interest. We can't, and this is physiological. So when we're in that, and a lot of your listeners probably know this, like when we're in that stress response, our amygdala takes over, and we can access only those options. And so this understanding that people are having this stress response, and it may not even look like it. They may look like they're completely calm and in control, but they may be inwardly having this stress response. So being, it doesn't mean you blow smoke. Like you're actually, you have to hold people accountable. And if you have guidelines for your process, it's like, big emotions are okay. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad, frustrated. It's not okay to be aggressive. It's
Yeah.
okay to threaten people. We're going
Yeah.
to have some guidelines in this process and how it's going to work. So it's not about being a pushover, but it's about having compassion at that level. And sometimes that compassion is we're going to draw some clear boundaries, and we're going to stop. If you can engage this process, we'll start again. But so gentle on the person doesn't mean being a pushover, but it does mean recognizing at some level that these people are just like us, and that I am completely nuts. Like any people that, any kind of bad behavior I've seen in any of my clients, I've done it myself
Yeah.
for sure. Um, so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think, yeah, tough on the issue, gentle on the person. I just love that. And it resonates with people too, because then, you can let them know that, all right, we're going to look critically at this issue and we're going to try to problem solve it. But we're not going to blame you, because as soon as you blame somebody, then, we're going to work on accountability, but we're not going to work on blame. That's like accountability is a relational attribute. Blame is an adversarial
Yeah.
attribute.
Right.
Sometimes I break them out like that. So it's like accountability, responsibility, as opposed to blame or fault.
Yes.
And of course, as lawyers, sometimes we have to look at fault because we have to attribute fault in order to, whatever. Like, and it's okay. The adversarial piece is important. We need to hold that, but we need to understand. There's another way.
There's another side to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love this conversation because I think that I think a lot of traditional or conventional, we'll say, maybe that's a better word, people who have conventional practices and are deeply rooted in the adversarial system hear these terms like peacekeeping or lawyers as healers, and all of our assumptions kick in that this is this is a soft approach, or that it's weakness, or that there's something that's less than about these kind of systems. And so I love putting these things together, and maybe on that front, I'll just ask you, like, how would you describe the peacemaking process to a skeptical lawyer? Maybe you've had to do that before.
Yeah, I do. And I I I was giving a presentation for the main bar association a couple years ago, and I had this room full of lawyers, and I was talking about this distinction between adversarial and relational, and I said, how many of you have ever gone home and had your spouse say, "Don't use that lawyer crap on me," and like, everybody in the room laughed, because we all recognize that we're trained in this way of thinking, and we get so involved in it that we internalize it, and then it
Mm,
becomes this. So the logical mind and the thinking mind, this tool becomes the place where we live, and it becomes our master. And there's a saying that the thinking mind or the intellect makes a great workhorse but a terrible master. And so then the question, well, then who's the master? And then we start getting into we could call it a spiritual discussion, but we could also think of it from a secular standpoint that actually, who are we fundamentally as humans? Are we our thoughts?
yeah.
Thank God, I'm not my thoughts, right? If I was my thoughts, like one minute I'd be the, greatest human on the planet, and the next minute I'd be like the worst, most, it's like
Yeah.
our thoughts are fickle. They're always this back and forth, and logic only goes so far. And because, if you look at any case, you can have a lawyer on one side and a lawyer on the other side, and they're both going to make really good arguments, logical arguments that fit together, that work. And so logic is really important, but it's not who we are.
Yeah.
We're fundamentally something more as human beings, and that's the beauty of this. And there's more and more science too about the intelligence in our bodies. It's more like the brain and the gut and all
Mm,
these other elements that inform how we think and who we are, and and how we know what we know. Sometimes, it's like we operate on as emotional creatures, on hunches, on our intuition, on what we know. And sometimes we know something to be true, and it's not because we learned it in some logical way, but we know it, and it's okay. And so this there's a freedom in being able to own our humanity. Like when I first started doing some of the commercial workouts and things like that, I'd be representing some client that was having trouble, and I'd be working with some banker, and I'd be telling the banker, like, this makes sense. Like, you should do it this way because it's going to be the best result for the bank. Like, I don't understand how you can make more money if you whatever, you have an auction, you sell this thing, it's, blah, 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 blah. And I could see this banker who works for like Chase or Citibank or Bank of America sitting on the other side, starting to having an emotional reaction. And they're like, "No, we're not going to do that." And I'll be like, "Well, why not? It makes sense, And they're like, "Well, we're not going to blah, blah, blah." And it's like, there is that person, and I'm sitting there scratching my head thinking, shouldn't they be looking at the bottom line? And, and we say, well, if you do this for one person, we're going to do it for every blah, slippery slope. And you can make all kinds of arguments. But the fact of the matter was, there's this human being sitting on the other side having an emotional, because that bank is their, it pays their mortgage,
yeah.
pays their bills. It's their people. They work. It's like important to them. And this client of mine who's not paying them and is a deadbeat or whatever it is threatening their livelihood, their home in some level. And so of course they're going to have an emotional reaction. I didn't get that for a long time. It was like, oh, all right, we have to take this whole other realm into account. And if we don't, we're doing our clients a disservice.
Yeah.
And so the lawyer's like, thank God for the litigators, right? Like
Right.
litigators have always played an important role. I, thank God again, am not one of them anymore. It's not my job. But there are litigators out there that are born. That's what they do. That's what they want to do. And if they understand the way of peacemaking, if they understand that the conversations need to happen, and that the people need to get together and they need to work stuff out, and that sometimes there does need to be a fight. Sometimes it's like, no, you need to go to a judge
Yeah.
and have trial. That's okay.
Yeah.
And one of my other peacemaking mentors, Judge Yazzie, the Chief Justice Emeritus Navajo Nation, says sometimes peacemaking is going to war. So,
Yeah.
you look at it from that full-on perspective. Like, if you're to be the best litigator, you need to be working with a full deck. I'm going to mix my metaphors here.
Yeah.
You need to have full toolkit. You need to have you need to understand all of these different elements. And so when I think of peacemaking, I don't think of peacemaking as relational process, even though in a peacemaking circle, it is fundamentally a relational process, and a litigation process is fundamentally an adversarial process. But when I think of peacemaking as a whole, I think of it as encompassing adversarial and relational ways of being and thinking, because that's who we are as people. We have both sides. We have we have it. We have it in us, and so to take it all into account and be whole. So when I talk to the lawyers about peacemaking, it's situational. It depends on what they want. If they're a lawyer, like, man, I can't do this anymore. I need, I want, and a lot of lawyers, right? Like, we get toward retirement age and it's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to start doing mediation. I'm going to stop litigating. And a lot of lawyers want to move to mediation because they don't want to litigate anymore.
Yeah.
That's fine. But if you're a litigator and you want to be the best litigator you can be, then you need to understand the relational side, the emotional side, the ways of knowing that are not just intellectual, and the processes that can get your clients what they want. Because this is about actually understanding what your clients really want at their deepest, because what they say they want and what they really want is not always the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Somebody says, I want $1 million. Like, well, why do you want $1 million?
Yeah.
Well, because I need this. And like, well, it turns out what they really want is to have security for their family in your retirement. It's like, well, okay, sure, $1 million might be a nice way to do that, but that's actually not what you want. What you want is safety and security. So identifying needs, identifying where people are really coming from, and then helping them to get to that, those are relational skills
Yeah.
that we need. So the lawyers, when they get it, they love it. They really like
Yeah.
it. That's why I love peacemaking. I'm like, you're really gonna like this. And the circles too. When people sit in a well-held circle, they love it. They're like, wow, this is really good. I really like this because it's
Yeah.
human. We've been sitting in circles since time immemorial. It's only in modern times that we stop sitting in circles after kindergarten, unless you need to sober up or you're going to die, and then you go to a 12-step program, and a lot of times they'll sit in a circle, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Process. So, it's still part of our culture, but I think the lawyers really, really like it when they understand it.
Yeah. 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 Why not have, like you say, have all the tools available? There's nothing wrong with more knowledge, more information, more tools in the toolbox, so to speak. I want to shift a little bit just to back to where we started, but I'm just curious, thinking about this adversarial and relational aspects of the work, and the immense amount of burnout, exhaustion, substance abuse, all the things that lawyers are known for experiencing. If you could just talk a little bit about what you think, or if you think, I won't ask, maybe I am asking a leading question, the connection between that adversarial culture that we have developed in the legal system, and what connection there is between that and our experience in the profession, especially people that are litigating.
Yeah, it's that's the reason.
Yeah. Right.
I
Yeah.
I I I know from my own personal experience that this living and breathing the adversarial, mindset is it's soul crushing. Because our souls don't really live in our thinking minds, you know. I'm not here to tell you where it lives, but that's like our, you know, our spirit, our being, our joy, happiness. Like, you know, when was the last time you were, you know, if you tried to analyze your happiness, why am I feeling happy? You know, that's a good way to to kind of crush it, you know.
Yeah.
And sure, external circumstances, and you know, and there are reasons why, you know, things that can support happiness versus you know, suffering, and there's a certain amount of suffering that comes with human life as well. But one of the deepest forms of suffering in my own experience has been being trapped in my head,
Mm.
you know, in my thought loop and in my thinking mind, and not being able to drop it and let it go and just relax into a natural space of joy or happiness, which is our birthright as humans, you know. And you know, we hear things like happiness is an inside job, and you know, and we you know, happiness comes from within. But what, you know, what does that even mean, you know? Well, it it means at some level that it's it's built into us, it's wired in, and it's not something that we can go out and get, or something that we can do or think our way into. And so, you know, when the lawyers, you know, when I say, well, you know, how many of you have had your wife or your husband say, don't use that lawyer crap on me? It's because we come home and then we, you know, we're so used to just using our intellect to move through our day and
Yeah.
to do these things that, you know, it's like, well, you know, we should, you know, our spouse says something and they want you, you know, like my wife, you know, if she's telling me about something that's hard, that's going on with her, and then I'm trying to problem solve it, right? We all been through this. Like, don't try to problem solve it. Like, she just wants me to actually feel what she's feeling, you know, right? And listen to her and allow her to maybe solve her own problem. We're not even to solve it, just to be in the you know, to be in the swamp. You know, if she's in a swamp, if I'm over there and saying on the side, like, hey, honey, boy, it looks really messy over there in that swamp. And maybe if you step over there, and she's like, no, I want you to come in the swamp with me.
Yeah.
Just be for a minute. And it's like, that's not like a lawyer kind of thing,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
so one of my friends, Annabelle, who's also a peacemaker, she was talking about somebody that she was working with, and she was saying, you know, that they, or maybe it was even in her own life, like saying, you know, I won the argument, you know, like I was right. You know, we want to be right
Yeah.
as attorneys, and when it gets to be coming home, it's like we have the argument. It's like, well, but the, you know, blah blah blah. The dinner was it was the dinner you asked for, because that you asked for this, and I made that, you know, and that was it. And it's like, okay, so you did, but who won in the court of the heart? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it isn't actually about that. So it's like we're missing something, and and sometimes we're missing it for our clients too.
Mm.
You know, because we're not able to connect, and because we're going into this place, and we take it on too, right? Like in all of the, you know, like the professions, when we're dealing with people that are having hard times, you know, we take it on, and so,
Yeah.
and it becomes kind of all consuming. So there's this, so and we can extrapolate it to our society too. It's not just lawyers. We're kind of like the hyperbole of the adversarial society we live in, but we live in a society that's based on adversarial thinking, and that doesn't prioritize connection and feeling. And we're at every turn, we're divided, and we're not together, you know, and we're not taught and encouraged how to listen to somebody who's, on the other side of the political divide, for example. It's very rare to have those kind of conversations where I actually, try to understand what, somebody who's like on the other side of like a MAGA person, and I'm from New Hampshire, right? I live free or die. So I tend to have
Yeah.
quite a few libertarian ideals that I tend to agree with,
Yeah.
on some of these, the MAGA ideals. So it's really interesting to have some, to myself to be somebody who can kind of straddle the spectrum in different ways. And, and I've very clear thoughts about, some of the issues and problems that we're having. But a lot of it is this being stuck in an adversarial system where the other person is the enemy.
Yeah.
And we become a bit of a victim in that situation because it's the other person has to change in order for me to be happy. And that's really hard because we really suffer. I need to win this case. I need that other side to capitulate. I need this or that. We need to, and these things a lot of times are out of our control.
Right.
And so all of a sudden our happiness is dependent on third parties or things out of our control. And wow, when the good things happen, then we might have a moment of happiness, but it's fleeting. So it's like, how can we sink into a space where our baseline is a sense of contentment, a sense of ease, a sense of happiness, where we're able to, our client comes in, or, we're able to be like, wow, there's a lot of, I don't need a new president or whatever to feel better. I don't need the system to change. I don't need that. I can take responsibility for my own situation. And I can, because I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid to actually listen to somebody with views that differ from me. It doesn't mean, and I might say, wow, that's going to cause a lot of suffering when you do that,
Yeah.
and maybe I can do something to better it, and I'm not saying don't fight, don't be political. I'm not saying that at all. It's just, there's a way of being relational in the dispute and having conflict and having arguments where, you know what I mean? It's not going to affect our core basic fundamental sense of being.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. And I think what I take away from this conversation is just balance, right? I mean, that I've said this, and I've only done a handful of episodes so far, but in whether it's here or in conversations with people, I'm not by any means suggesting or trying to imply that the adversarial system should go away, or that it doesn't work, or that it's inherently bad. Which I think some people just assume when they hear phrases like peacemaking or lawyers as healers or these kind of things. And what I love about listening to you talk about this stuff is that sense of balance, that these two things need to exist simultaneously. And the more that we balance them with one another, everybody benefits. Lawyers will be happier and better and more able to do their jobs. Clients get more out of the process, all of that. So I love that. Well, I'm going to probably have to have you come back on because I really wanted to talk about presence and conflict, which is a whole nother topic that I love hearing you talk about. But we're going to wrap this up for now. Final question is, what do you think, just kind of in physical reality, what can become possible when lawyers stop seeing themselves purely as adversaries or advocates and can begin seeing themselves as healers of human conflict or stewards of human relationships? What do you see as possible if people can do that?
Well, in a word, transformation or happiness. There's a way. We're seeing a lot of challenges in our society right now, and things are changing, and things are really hard, and so there's there's this um, almost I don't know if desperation is the right word, but there's a despair, and a sense of powerlessness.
Mm,
Like, what can I do in the face of climate change
right.
or, this crazy political polarization that we have going on? So I think the word is empowerment. It's not transformation, it's empowerment. It empowers us to do something because we're here and we can do something. You know, can we change the world? Sure, we can change the world, but we can change ourselves. And it empowers us to be able to work in a way that's meaningful and purposeful for us, where we can feel good about what we're doing, and we can feel that our work is aligned and that it's creating whatever benefit we can. And we all have our work, whatever it is, whether you're a lawyer or a mediator or a truck driver or you name it. Like, we have this space that we are working in, and it changes too, right? As people, we grow and change. And so, but it allows us to express our own being in a way that's it empowers us. So I believe this kind of understanding, this kind of work is empowering for us as attorneys, so that we can actually do what we want to and feel good about it.
Well said. Um, all right. Well, thanks again, Andy. I really appreciate your insights and taking the time to come and talk with me and my listeners. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure, David. I invite any of your listeners to reach out anytime too.
Yeah. Oh, on that note, that's a good reminder. Where can people find you if they're curious in what you're up to?
My website is Andy Kull, ANDYKULL .com, or send me an email at kull.law@gmail.
Perfect. Awesome, Andy. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.